Trump envoy Steve Witkoff went on Fox News last night and gave an update that maybe we're getting closer. We may be on the verge of coming to a negotiated settlement between the United States and Russia to bring it into the war. Now, if you think that's good news, if you want the war to end, that's cool. But the problem is there's another participant in this that wasn't quite so excited about it. That's Volodymyr Zelensky. And as this continues going down the path, you had Zelensky on 60 Minutes on Sunday, again throwing the vice president under the bus, again throwing President Trump under the bus, and he seems increasingly out of touch with anything that Trump wants to do to bring the war to an end, which could bring us to a point to where there may be more of a problem between Trump and Zelensky than there is between Trump and Putin. Now, we're going to unpack a lot of that stuff and see if that's not necessarily a bad thing with Colonel Doug Macgregor, CEO of Our Country, Our Choice, highly decorated combat veteran and great friend of the show. Doug, welcome back as always.
Hey, thanks, Dan.
I say this stuff out loud, but I know that probably before the camera pulled up on you, you're probably rolling your eyes already that, well, of course, there's more trouble between Trump and Zelensky, between Trump and Putin. How do you see that dynamic, first of all, just between those major players?
I think that President Trump has yet to fully take charge of his own government and his own policies. I mean, if one looks at what he's been doing since he came in, for all the talk about finding an end to this war and taking stern measures to achieve that outcome, what have we seen? We've seen essentially an extension of the Biden policies. The money has continued to flow, and there's no demonstrable understanding of the origins of the war, its meaning, and what has to happen to end it. They've just sort of consistently ignored whatever the Russians have said. Now, maybe Mr. Witkoff, the unappointed, unofficial ambassador, envoy, whatever they call him, has a different story to tell. I don't know. But right now, excuse me, it doesn't look good. And Zelensky in particular is someone that, frankly, should have been removed quite early. And people say, well, how could you do that? Well, you suspend all American military aid to Ukraine. Number one, we've discussed this before. And then you get all of the Americans who are in Ukraine out. I mean, Trump quite recently said, this is not my war, this is Biden's war. Wrong. It's your war now, President Trump. You haven't taken the decisive action to distance yourself from this disaster. So here we sit, and nothing concrete or fundamental has occurred.
Now, I'm hopeful that maybe those dynamics are chipped, and maybe they should have been the case from day one. I think his claim that he's going to have this over in one day, in 24 hours, obviously that was hyperbole from the beginning, but I thought that it would imply that he was going to be ready to take decisive action on day one, which could have brought this to some kind of a conclusion, probably even already, if he had done the things that you suggested. But belatedly or not, it looks like he may finally have had his patience run out. And one of the things that he's being vilified for, especially in the European community right now, is because he said in an interview last night, what they're claiming was he said that Zelensky actually started this war. There's a bit of a nuance here, as you'll see at the beginning of this clip, but watch this.
Biden could have stopped it, and Zelensky could have stopped it, and Putin should have never started it. Everybody's to blame.
Have you spoken to President Zelensky, sir, about his offer to purchase more Patriot missile batteries?
Oh, I don't know. He's always looking to purchase missiles. He's against. Listen, when you start a war, you got to know that you can win the war, right? You don't start a war against somebody that's 20 times your size, and then hope that people give you some missiles.
So at the first of that clip there, he says Putin shouldn't have started it. Biden could have stopped it. Zelensky could have stopped it. But then he did circle back around in the last part about talking about missiles. He said you don't start a war if you're 20 times in the inferior side of the power dynamics. I want to break down a few of those, kind of get your views on them. First of all, what do you make about the claim that Zelensky or Biden could have stopped the war before? I can't hear you, Doug.
Biden was always in the position as the president of the United States and the leader of NATO to stop all of it quite quickly. That was always doable. So that much is true. When you start talking about the rest of it, I think the president, frankly, is a little confused. This is a much more complex, complicated matter than apparently he realizes. This whole business was a function of NATO expansion from the beginning. And President Putin has been saying for years, over and over and over again, don't push this envelope. We don't want NATO on our borders. If it shows up on our borders, there will be a war. In the meantime, we poured billions and billions and billions into Ukraine for the purpose of building up what turned out to be the largest army in NATO. By the time the Russians went into Ukraine, you had almost 800,000 men under arms in Ukraine. They had some of the best equipment and weaponry that you could get. And they had ostensibly, in retrospect, the enormous benefit of American military leadership and strategy, and secondarily British military leadership and strategy, which is a hell of a note, frankly, since it's been catastrophic for Ukraine. But the point is, President Trump might also think about taking his own advice when it comes to size and numbers. He was talking about Zelensky. Well, Zelensky was promised by us that he would win because we would stand behind him and provide him with everything that we could. That was always a dangerous promise and not one that was likely to be fulfilled. But President Trump needs to re-examine the wisdom of waging a tariff war or an economic war on China that is infinitely larger and whose markets are frankly increasingly broader and deeper than our own. So we're in the same position now vis-a-vis China as Zelensky is with Russia.
And so what about the claim that from the British side, and actually let me show you a clip here. This is very symptomatic of what is going on all throughout the European today. They're all talking about, well, Trump is saying these bad things about Zelensky. Here's one of them.
This is now hardcore levels of Kremlin propaganda coming out of the White House. And I don't think there's many people listening that would ever think they would see the day. And it just leads me to go, what's Putin got on him? Why would you be coming out with this sort of stuff? I know he's petty and he sort of falls out with people, and what he tends to do, according to those in Trump world, is he makes up with them, but he makes sure he humiliates them as well. I don't know where we go from here, John. Again, last time I was here, we were talking about how America is no longer a ally that can be relied on, and he's just drifting further and further away from the natural world order that many of us have known most of our lives.
Now, I want to key in on that last part there. He said this is the natural world order that we've known for most of our lives. But that natural world order, going back all the way through the Biden when they were all together on this, is completely detached from reality. And when these guys talk about that, Trump, by saying he wants this to come to an end, is just touting Putin propaganda. For whatever flaws Trump has, he is locked in on what is and isn't possible here, whereas the European Union and UK in particular still seem to think it's 1991.
Well, the so-called British ruling class, of which this man is not a member but a spokesman, is very much in bed with the Wolfowitzes and the Pearls and others of that ilk, and Victoria Nuland, who want to live in a world where you have permanent enemies and permanent allies. But we know from history those permanent allies never last. This alliance should have gone out of existence back in the early 1990s. This NATO business is irrelevant. They liked what they had because they didn't have to invest heavily in their own defense. And the British in particular love NATO because they can populate the senior ranks of NATO and the headquarters with disproportionate numbers of people who are British in order to move Europe in the direction they want it to go. It was a joke when I was in SHAPE headquarters. You turn around and you couldn't walk down the hall without tripping over a British officer. Now, I like many of these people, but the problem is Britain was a rowboat compared with the German battleship. Yet there were very few Germans. And that, of course, was by design. All of this is nonsense. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just talking about propaganda. He's just repeating utter nonsense from the ruling class. They're in a lot of trouble in Great Britain. I don't think this ruling class is going to make it. They've been lying to their population about a whole range of things. Britain is a very nearly a boiling pot of discontent, anger, and violence. So I think he should shut up and tend to his horses at home. I wouldn't pay any attention to him at all. But this natural world order that he's talking about, the natural world order went out of existence after the First World War because we, in our efforts to rescue the British and the French from certain defeat, destroyed it. And it's never coming back. And what we've had is this artificial construct since 1945, entirely based on the assumption that we would rule the world financially, economically, and militarily. Well, we can't afford it. We've destroyed ourselves, and the world has changed. You know, the Soviets after World War II, everyone feared them, but you and I know they had terrible losses. They were in no position to go into another major war. And so we went on with this Cold War for decades. We understood all of that, but then it ended. And the world began moving in directions that made sense, with great powers reemerging all over the planet that should reemerge. I'm very sorry for this Englishman, but the truth is England now is a very small, utterly foolish and pretentious power. It doesn't seem to want to come to terms with the limits of its own resources and capabilities. And so it tries to claim control of ours through MI6 and through all sorts of other mechanisms and use us for their devices. This is not the British people. This is just this strange queer ruling class in England.
And, you know, one of the things that I think the methods they used to try and continue that to go on is to keep alive this permanent enemy of Russia by keeping alive this permanent war. I think the last thing the UK wants is to end the war because of a whole range of possibilities here. And one of the things that they ignore, and I think probably intentionally, is this claim that we're, you know, the whole context here is that they're saying, well, no, you know, you've turned Zelensky into the bad guy. He's the only one trying to end the war on just and peaceful terms, except that you look back and you look, Zelensky himself was the guy from 2019 on that refused to comply with the Minsk agreements. He refused the opportunity from Putin in December 2021 to get the war off. He added the law in March of 2021 that said they were going to now retake the positions, the areas that Russia had, to include Crimea, which was a red cape in front of a bull. Then, of course, he refused the the April 2022 deal in Istanbul, et cetera, and is refusing now to do anything that Trump wants to bring the war to an end. So if you're looking at who's keeping the war going, it seems to me it's Vladimir Zelensky.
Yeah, well, obviously Zelensky is a criminal. He was a nothing comedian who spoke only Russian and had been raised in Russia, had no real connection whatsoever to Ukraine in any way, shape, or form, and was picked by one of the oligarchs and Victoria Nuland and the rest of these people to be the puppet for Ukraine. I mean, this is the sort of thing we tried in Georgia. The Russians intervened there militarily and killed it and put an end to it. We've tried to set up puppet regimes all over the place, ostensibly for the purpose of either harming or containing what we said was the dangerous state of Russia. All of this nonsense needs to come to an end. But I think the president is surrounded by people who are no less invested in the lie and the fiction than the man you just quoted. I mean, if you go through these people like Gorka and Waltz and Rubio, and my God, they live in a world that doesn't exist. It's all fiction. Let's stop for a minute and understand a couple of things that emerged from this Ukraine war that nobody else ever comes forward and mentions. Number one, what was demonstrated conclusively on the battlefield in Ukraine? What's being demonstrated conclusively is that NATO equipment, NATO military technology, which is in large measure American, is inferior to the equipment the Russians have brought to the battlefield. Secondly, NATO tactics, so-called NATO operational art, is stuck in the distant past. It's ill-suited to the modern battlefield. And the people that have paid the price for this are the Ukrainians who've been forced into fighting it. So that's very, very important. And in the meantime, in this stupid tariff attack on most of all China, and vacillating back and forth between attacking China economically and then making peace with it, we've made fools of ourselves, and we've demonstrated that in addition to no longer being the military power we once were, we're no longer the economic power we think we are. So these are the two great insights that are settling into the BRICS community. If you live in Japan, China, Korea, India, Iran, anywhere, it's hard to miss this. The people in Brazil haven't missed it. The people in most of the world haven't missed it. But this man in England completely fails to grasp it, as do too many people in Washington. President Trump needs to be the platonic figure who leads everybody out of the cave into the daylight. I just don't know if he could do it, because he's torn and he keeps vacillating between one position and the other. That's the prescription for failure in national leadership.
One of the other areas that has led to some disputes, but it looks to me like, belatedly or not, that Trump is finally coming to the point to where he's ready to say, all right, we're just gonna cut bait here, because he has started saying actually a lot more often now, this whole issue about this war is actually Biden's war. I know you're saying, well, it's his war, but if he may be using this as a device to get this off the table. Here's one of the recent comments he made.
Do you have a reaction to Russia's Palm Sunday attack?
I think it was terrible, and I was told they made a mistake, but I think it's a horrible thing. I think the whole war is a horrible thing.
You said they made you were told they made a mistake. Do you mean it was unintentional?
They made a mistake. I believe it was. Look, you're going to ask them. This is Biden's war. This is not my war. I've been here for a very short period of time. This is a war that was under Biden. He gave him billions and billions of dollars. He should have never allowed it. Remember this. This is Biden's war. I'm just trying to get it stopped so that we can save a lot of lives. They happen to be Ukrainian and Russian lives. But all I want to do is get it stopped.
Now, I want to zero in on that issue he's talking about there. That's this attack that happened in Sumy, where a lot of civilians were killed, and virtually all of the Western media is seizing on this as just the latest ever, that Putin is this evil guy. He just intentionally attacked this place for no good reason other than to kill civilian people. That was his intended target, was to destroy that. But then we have information by a Ukrainian member of the Rada, of their parliament, who came out and said, hey, listen, that this is something that we knew about days in advance. There was a military award ceremony by the 117th Brigade that had been placed there in the middle of Sumy on a day on Palm Sunday, et cetera. And she was saying, hey, we told you guys not to do this, and you went ahead and did it anyway, and then Russia struck it. In response to this, or in I guess, answer to the charges, Sergei Lavrov yesterday was unequivocal that, yeah, we attacked it, but here's the reason why.
There have been countless instances of artillery and air defense systems being deployed in urban areas near kindergartens. There are millions of videos online showing Ukrainian women screaming at soldiers to get away from stores and playgrounds. Yet this practice continues. We have evidence regarding who was present at the facility that was struck in Sumy. It was yet another gathering of Ukrainian military commanders with their Western counterparts, whether under the guise of mercenaries or some other pretext, I don't know. NATO military personnel are present there and directly overseeing operations. Everyone knows this. The New York Times recently explained how the Americans have played a decisive role in attacks against Russia from the very beginning. Without their involvement, most long-range missiles would never have even left their launch sites.
So what do you make of that, Doug? Is this just Sergei Lavrov just trying to put a good face on something that was bad, or is he telling the truth?
My experience over the last 3+ years has been that the Russians have always told the truth. The Ukrainians have nearly always lied, and the United States and Great Britain and other Western outlets for the media, thanks to MI6 and CIA, have done everything in their power to disseminate the lies. So I'm sure the man's telling the truth. Go back to Bucha. Remember Bucha? Oh, the Russians have done this. They tied people's hands behind their back, shot them through the heads, then they threw the bodies in the streets and piled them up in the cellars. It's all nonsense. We know that now. It's absolute lie. Let's just move on. This is a lot of nonsense. There's something that's even more important. In April, I received a phone call this is April of 2022. I received a phone call from Mar-a-Lago, and the individual on the other end said, well, we're interested in what you think about Ukraine. And I said, well, sure. I said, the first thing to consider is that the Ukraine war needs to end immediately. We should negotiate an end to this, convene a peace talks as soon as possible. And they said, why? I said, because the Ukrainians are going to be crushed. They have no chance of winning. And the Russians aren't even fully engaged. But when they do, it'll be over. Well, everybody here says the Ukrainians are winning. This is the sort of stupidity and ignorance and arrogance that has passed for advice to the president. People around him need to go away. He's got the wrong people advising him, in my judgment, on just about everything. And if he persists in this, we're going to be at war very shortly in the Middle East, and we're going to watch our economy collapse into ruins. I don't know what else to say, Dan, because that's where we're headed. There is a flight from reality inside the administration as well as inside the Beltway. You can't turn to people like Rubio or Gorka or Waltz or Hegseth. These people are all part of this sort of self-induced fiction that has no bearing on reality. They have a false picture of everything. The world that we live in, our strategic posture, our capabilities. It's very, very dangerous. I don't know how the president fixes it, but as long as these people are there, it's going to be very difficult for the president to get out of this, to get out of the mess he's in Ukraine and disengage fundamentally from it, unless he does exactly what I've been saying for many months now. And this started, you and I talked about this before the election, after the election, and have continued to talk about it. Suspend all support for Zelensky and this criminal regime, the most corrupt, one of the most, if not the most corrupt country in the world, where the population is being ruthlessly exploited by its own government, and millions of lives are lost and destroyed as a result, all unnecessarily. So he's got to make some profound changes. He needs to do it very quickly. Get rid of these people. If he doesn't, then he's going to be standing on the bridge of the Titanic, waving to the few people on lifeboats that were smart enough to get off.
You know, that you talk about people around him. There's also people near his circle that have continued to say all this stuff. And I'm gonna show you a clip here of, and you're gonna roll your eyes when I say this name too, Jack Keane, who is talking about what were the results of this Sumy issue and what we should do. But listen carefully here. This sounds almost like he's, maybe even not almost, this sounds like he's saying that Trump should just go back to the Biden plan.
He knows full well that on Palm Sunday, which is a very religious holiday in Ukraine, families are gathering to celebrate that religious holiday. He targeted the town center of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine, knowing the result would be civilian casualties, 34 dead, 117 wounded, not a military target in sight. This is all about killing civilians and putting pressure on Ukraine to give up and concessions to the Russians. Putin, does he want peace or not? It doesn't look like it, Stuart. Who wants peace? The President of the United States, the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, and the Ukrainian people. I think we're going to have to start to play tough with Putin. Sanctions, hit him hard, and also upscale the military assistance to Ukraine.
Yeah, all right. Hit them with sanctions and give all this military equipment. I mean, that literally is 3 years of failure in the Biden administration, and that's what this guy is advocating. It's crazy.
Well, why stop now? He's been enormously successful. He's moved from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. Got to keep in mind that Keane was in the forefront of telling everyone all through the spring and all through the summer and the fall of 2022 that the Ukrainians were winning. They were on the verge of victory. All they needed was a little more equipment and a little more time. Russia was falling apart. Its industries couldn't keep up. It couldn't recruit soldiers. Russians were deserting. I mean, just go down the list. This man has been disseminating lies for years. If people in Washington insist on listening to him because he was a retired four-star who in their judgment helped to deliver failure in the Middle East as well as now in eastern Ukraine, there's not much we can do about it. This sort of thing goes on. Fox does it. CNN does it. All the mainstream media, because they're all part of the same cabal. In most cases, I think most of the people that want us to double down on failure in Ukraine want us to expand the war in the Middle East and go to war with virtually everyone in the region until the entire Middle East is subjugated to Israeli dominance and hegemony. So it's all part of the same thing. We've either got to wake up and dispose of these people and get them out because they present a clear and present danger to the survival of our country, or we go under.
Yeah, that's not a pleasant choices between the two, but it's just really hard to see how we get from here to that outcome. I'm just hoping we can avoid the wars. We're going to talk in a minute about the Middle East stuff, but I want to hang on here about the at least what it appears to be, and from what I'm hearing from some sources in the administration, Trump is moving in a direction to where he is ready to cut bait and say, all right, we're going to get this one off the table. Last night, also on Fox News, we had Witkoff, who was talking about that we may be on the verge of agreeing to something with Russia.
I think you used a very good word there, Sean, emerging. This is the third meeting I've had with him. This last meeting lasted close to 5 hours. We had two of his key advisors in the room at the time, Ushakov and Kirill Dmitriev, and it was a compelling meeting. And towards the end, we actually came up with, and I'm going to say finally, but I don't mean it in the way that we were waiting. I mean it in the way that it took a while for us to get to this place. What Putin's request is to have a permanent peace here. So beyond a ceasefire, we got an answer to that. This peace deal is about these so-called 5 territories, but there's so much more to it. There's security protocols. There's no NATO, Article 5. I mean, it's just, a lot of detail attached to it. It's a complicated situation, rooted in some real problematic things happening between the two countries. And I think we might be on the verge of something that would be very, very important for the world.
Maybe important for the world, but Ukraine has been just alarmed about this in response to this comment here by Witkoff. And by the way, basically what he's laying out there, saying that we're on the verge of agreeing to the June 14 lines from last summer, which is the 4 regions, demilitarization, denazification, neutral, no NATO, et cetera. He literally laid all those conditions out there without being specific about where the territory would be. But it sounds like he's getting close to announcing something between the United States and Russia. Do you think that's actually going to happen?
Well, it's hard to tell. The first thing that we should have done, and again, this is something else I've urged repeatedly, is to go back to the proposals the Russians submitted in December of 2021, which were designed to forestall the conflict in Ukraine, that outlined some of what you just discussed, but much more. This man, Witkoff, is dealing with 2 different things. Now, there are more than 2, but I'm going to try and boil it down to 2. One is normalizing relations with Russia. We need to do that. President Trump understands that, and that can be done. Now, the Congress doesn't want anything to do with it. None of the usual suspects that live inside the Beltway, where war is the answer to everything, and they want to bully and dominate the world in perpetuity, they don't like that idea. But the truth is, normalizing relations with the Russians is something that we can do. And I think that's a big part of what he's discussing. The Russians are very favorably disposed to normalize relations and build excellent business relationships with us, which should never have been destroyed anyway. So that's number one. Number 2 is the settlement regarding NATO and the rest of Europe. This is trickier. I say it's trickier because it's about much more than what he's mentioned. The Russians have always been interested in a new architecture, security architecture. And if you go back to the mutual balanced force reduction talks and the conventional force agreements that were reached, that gives you a flavor for what the Russians are looking for now. They want to set up a regime that will guarantee security for their country. Now, how much of what is currently under Russian control remains or is given up voluntarily by the Russians, I can't even begin to imagine that. I don't know why they would. Again, the Russians have won this. They hold the strategic initiative. But there are two things that the Russians don't want. They don't want a war with us, and they don't want a bad relationship with us economically. The problem is that we make it very difficult for them because we vacillate. Again, we're not sure from one day to the next how far we're willing to go. Now, this is the last point. This is very important. And I'm sure Mr. Witkoff is aware, maybe not, but President Putin gave some very important instructions and guidance, I would say, to all the leading economic leaders inside Russia in the context of BRICS, and talked specifically about us and the West. And he effectively said, the West is finished. We can't depend on anything from them. Whatever arrangements we make, we have to be self-contained and largely independent. We have to turn our attention to BRICS. That is economic relations and good business with everyone in BRICS, China, India, Iran, potentially in the future, most of Southeast Asia, I'd say probably most of Northeast Asia. That's where we need to focus because Europe is just it's not trustworthy. It's not reliable. So on the one hand, I'm very hopeful that Mr. Witkoff comes up with something that is useful and can last. But on the other hand, I think the Russians have come around to understanding they can't bet on anything. How do they know that in 2 years or 3 years, somebody else shows up in the White House, the various lobbies pour in, and they buy up Congress and tell him we have to restore hostility to Moscow? I think that's what Mr. Putin's worried about. Yeah, it's very difficult to do business with us because there's just no stability, no certainty, and no rationality.
Yeah, hard to argue with that just based on the track record here over the last couple of decades in particular. But even right now in the near term, even if this is what Trump wants, I think Trump is going to have to, and if he's not already there, like really rapidly come to the point to where, no, it's time to cut bait here and cut Zelensky loose and do all the things you say. The reason I say that is because while you had Steve Witkoff talking about we're getting close to making a deal with Russia to get this thing over with, and it's going to include territorial submissions and concessions on the Ukraine side, you have Zelensky trying to go the opposite direction.
Absolutely necessary for this war to finally end. And it must end at the negotiation table. Only the most difficult conditions for Russia on the battlefield and in international relations can force it to do what's needed for a true peace. And today marks exactly 1 month since Russia rejected the US proposal for a full and unconditional ceasefire. 1 month that has made it completely clear Russia is the sole cause of this war. Without strength against Russia, there will be no will in Russia to accept and implement any realistic and effective proposals for peace.
That is so bizarre. That was 4 days ago, by the way. That was so bizarre that he's talking as though he's on the strategic initiative. His side has all the cards, and they're trying to do Putin a solid by saying, hey, look, man, just get this war over with on my terms and everything will be fine. In the response to that quote from Witkoff last night, today you have Zelensky saying, look, these territories, that's a red line for us. We're discussing, this is stuff that Steve Witkoff is discussing outside his competence. So after insulting both the president and the vice president on 60 Minutes on Sunday, now he's throwing Witkoff under the bus. Doug, if Trump does not cut this guy loose by the end of the day, I got to wonder what in the world's going on.
Well, I think that's the key point here. President Trump has to be an effective leader at this point. That means that Zelensky's got to go. He's got to do the things that we've discussed. When you listen to Zelensky talk about what he demands of Russia, it's very similar to Mr. Netanyahu's demand for the so-called Libyan solution for Iran. Netanyahu and Zelensky are of one mind. They both want the same thing, the complete and utter destruction of their opponents as a precondition for future peace and stability. So it's Zelensky's version of the Libyan solution. Now we've got the Netanyahu Libyan solution waiting in the wings. Fortunately, I think President Trump stands a chance of getting out of Ukraine if he makes a decision. Again, he's the commander in chief. Everything is at his discretion. All of the aid going into Ukraine is at his discretion. Congress voted for it, but he has the ability, the authority to halt it at any point in time he chooses. And again, he's got to understand that he's not going to end up being popular with everybody. One of the things that I think President Trump wants to be is popular with everyone. That's not going to happen. It's never been the case for any effective president. If he wants to be effective, he needs to toss our friend Zelensky overboard along with his corrupt regime. And all of the senior military officers involved in this tragedy from the United States should be removed. Get rid of them. If you keep them around, they will continue to subvert whatever President Trump does. They will try to restore chaos and conflict wherever they can. So it's not just a question of Zelensky. What do you do about the people in the CIA and the Department of Defense who've done everything in their power to mire us in this quicksand? They've got to go away too. So he's got to understand this is a much bigger issue than just for Ukraine for President Trump and the United States.
Well, I certainly hope that he at least gets that one off the table. Within days. I think that this latest thing here, it should remove any doubt that anybody has that it's time for Zelensky to go his own way and to be detached. Hopefully they'll do exactly what you suggest with the whole cut off the aid, remove the troops, all that kind of stuff. We'll see what happens with that. In the remaining amount of time we have here, I do want to talk about a little bit about what's going on in the Middle East. You've referred to it a couple of times here. In the same interview on Fox last night where Witkoff was talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, he also talked about the situation with Iran.
The conversation with the Iranians will be much about two critical points. One, enrichment. As you mentioned, they do not need to enrich past 3.67%. In some circumstances, they're at 60%. In other circumstances, 20%. That cannot be. And you do not need to run, as they claim, a civil nuclear program where you're enriching past 3.67%. Verification will be the key point that undergirds this agreement if we're fortunate enough to get there. And we're going to have very tight verification.
Okay, so on March the 7th, Trump from the Oval Office was basically saying, hey, we're running out of time and there's going to be bombs if they don't agree to everything we asked. The things we were asking were stuff that Iran would never agree to. He kind of repeated that on the 7th of April, but then he did a pretty sharp turn, and now all of a sudden he sounded much more conciliatory and, no, we're willing to make a deal, and we don't need to go and bomb. We can just have this peace situation here. How do you see this situation unfolding?
This is about a nuclear monopoly that Israel enjoys in the region. No one in the region other than Israel can be permitted to have a nuclear weapon. That's what this is about. Israel has over 300 weapons, immense destructive power that can be launched from air, missile, or sea. No one in the region has any nuclear weapons. And what everyone in the region knows is that you must not have any, because having any threatens Israel. Now, what are we talking about with Israel? Well, we're talking about something much more than the defense of Israel. The defense of Israel went out the window back over a year ago when this event on the 7th of October, and we've talked about that before. I am absolutely skeptical of the notion that this was something that happened without the Israelis knowing about it and reacting to it. Complete nonsense. They're too competent, and they had that place under excellent surveillance. I don't believe that for a minute. But the narrative is we were attacked on 7 October, and this horrific attack is now justification for us to effectively dominate the whole region, because we in Israel will not be safe until everyone is subjugated. That means that only Israel can have a nuclear weapon. So that's really the heart of the whole issue. Now, when you turn to Iran, the Iranians had agreements with us based upon what the Biden administration had done. Well, President Trump, in response to the Israel lobby's support for him the last time around, said, I'm going to cancel it. And of course, there were great cheers in Israel. Cancel the arrangement that has essentially imparted stability and security to this nuclear development in Iran. Everybody was very happy. Now we're back to where we were before. We're exactly as you pointed out. President Trump is somebody who privately does not want a war. There's no question about that. However, he's talked himself into a corner, Dan. And unless the stipulations are accepted and the Israelis effectively are willing to bow down and go along with Israel, you're still going to get a war. And I think, unfortunately, the betting is still heavily on Mr. Netanyahu's side. He's still in charge. He has to approve. And if he doesn't approve this arrangement that we come back with, that Mr. Witkoff is putting together on behalf of President Trump and ultimately Israel, then I think you get a war. Because in the final analysis, is everyone in the region prepared to live under Israeli hegemony? Because that's the message.
And do you think the others in the region are willing to do anything to prevent an Israeli hegemony, or will they just live with whatever happens?
I think there is already been a lot of evidence for the emergence of an alliance across the region against Israel and us. We try every chance we get to try and undermine and divide that. We always have some measure of success with the United Arab Emirates, with the Saudis, others in the Gulf that are not very strong societies and have very weak militaries, when we can persuade them to attack, say, a group like the Houthis. You remember there was a war between Saudi Arabia and the so-called Houthis, people in Yemen, for a very long time. And a lot of Americans were shocked to discover that the Saudis were actually supporting Al-Qaeda and ISIS against the Houthis. And people were wondering, why are we bombing these people if they're against the very same people that have caused so much destruction and murder across the region? So you still have these kinds of contradictions. But I would say today that Egypt and Iran are very much of the same mind. They see all the agreements having been violated by the Israelis. They want to trust us, but they don't know that they can. You have the Russians and the Chinese on the outside and others that are members of BRICS that are saying, we'll back you because you're vital to the global economy and you're part of our system, if you will, called BRICS. And then, of course, the Turks. And the Turks have always been the 500-pound gorilla in the corner. And thus far, Mr. Erdogan has tamed the gorilla. But how much longer can Mr. Erdogan tame the gorilla? Because the gorilla may turn around and remove him. There's that much anger, frustration, and ferocity in Turkey right now directed at Israel and us. And again, we've been talking about this for years. This is simply built to the point where now it's truly explosive.
But so there's one thing that is a bit puzzling to me, is that, okay, Israel wants to have hegemony, and for the most part, they have it right now. They don't even have to gain it. They already have it. But they have made Iran the boogeyman for so long that they just have this insatiable desire to quell them. And yet this whole, ever since the 10/7 and all the things where Israel basically systematically eviscerated Hamas, Hezbollah, weakened again the Houthis, if not quelled any of them full outright, they did. And it showed that Iran was completely powerless to do anything about it. I mean, what nation on the planet can have their embassy destroyed in another country and to have an assassination in their capital city on an inauguration and not go to war with somebody? Yet that's exactly what Iran didn't do, because they don't have the power to do it. So that should tell you.
Wait a minute. That's false. That's a fundamentally false statement.
Which part?
False. They don't have the power to go to war. You haven't looked carefully at Iran. Iran's arsenal of missiles is enormous. It could flatten Israel in a day. They have the power to go to war. They have chosen repeatedly to avoid war. And I've said this 1,000 times. No one in the Middle East is interested in a war except Israel and the United States. That's it. There's no one else in the region that wants a war. Everyone is going to go to great lengths to avoid a war, not because of Israel, but because of us. The Iranians don't want to go to war with us. The Iranians have been trying for 30 years to change their relationship with the United States, to build a rapport economically, socially, politically with the United States. So don't make the mistake of assuming because someone has opted not to do something, they can't. The real question at this stage is, what's the incentive for them to continue to do nothing, particularly when they're told that the only way they can satisfy us, potentially, based upon Mr. Netanyahu's demands, is to turn themselves into Libya. And we all know what happened in Libya.
Right. Yeah. Not a good situation to cite if you want them to accomplish it. But
so don't assume this weakness. I mean, people said the same things about the Russians. You know, the Russians went through years of humiliation at our hands as we advanced NATO further and further east, and continued to treat the Russians as though they were irrelevant, and created all sorts of utterly false reasons to embargo them and hurt them and harm them, particularly under Biden and his predecessors. None of this is new. Does that mean that the Russians don't have the power to go to war against us or anybody else? Well, obviously, the answer is no. They have the power. They have not wanted to go to war. It strikes me right now that if you look at the rest of the world, the only two powers in the world today that don't seem to appreciate the catastrophic consequences of a real war are the United States and Israel.
Yeah, and so I'll accept your statements there. I didn't even mean to imply that Iran was weak and incapable of doing that. Only that whether diplomatically, politically, or militarily, that they have not wanted to go to war, and that they showed restraint with all those attacks that we would never show, because they don't want to go to conflict. And with that being demonstrated, there should be no reason for Israel and the United States to still press so hard to try to find a casus belli to destroy them. So the question is, what is the driving imperative to destroy Iran and destroy all this stuff when they're already safe from Iran?
Well, they don't think they are. And if you make any attempt to persuade the Israelis that they can live with the Iranians, they will reject you. They just won't listen to you. So the Netanyahu position is really the position of the Israelis and their agents here in the United States, who are heavily involved in our government and heavily involved in pushing for war in the Middle East. Their view is that Israel will not be safe until this regime is destroyed. That's why you've listened to people talk about the strategy behind the strikes that are coming. If there is, quote unquote, a war, the strikes will focus on not only trying to destroy the nuclear facilities where they try to develop a weapon, in theory, they also want to destroy the regime. And this is where you get these statements from the president of the United States. This will be a bombing on a scale the world has never seen. You know, all this sort of marketing language that the president uses. He is a marketing genius, and he tends to rely heavily on hyperbole. So I think that's the view from Mr. Netanyahu. Either they're dead and gone and buried, or they have a new puppet regime obedient to their will in Washington's, or they have to go away. So they're running into problems, by the way, big problems right now with the Turks. And the Israelis, there are very smart Israelis over there that know just how dangerous the Turks are. But there are many that keep dismissing them. Oh, you know, they can't do it economically. They don't have enough money. Their economy isn't that strong. Their society is this. The Israelis do what we do. We tend to impute to others our value system. And tragically, Dan, we've adopted the Israeli value system, which is everything's about money. Everything's about luxury. Everything's about living in a high prosperity environment. They don't understand, and we don't understand, that there are people out there willing to sacrifice what we think is so important on the grounds that their civilization, their culture, their nation must survive. And that means they must fight. So my point is that there are many in the Israeli general staff that understand just how serious and dangerous the Turks are. But again, everything comes down to us. will we support the Israelis? And they're convinced that with enough air and missile power, and maybe some special operations power in limited numbers, that they can control events and what happens in the region. I don't agree with them. I think it's a very dangerous position to take, but that's the thinking.
And that's what I wanted to ask you in the last bit of time we have here. In the event that Trump is not able to restrain the dogs of war, and we end up taking action jointly with Israel, or however it turns out, what is the prospect, or better question, how would you see things playing out? Because unless you go in with this big ground force of 500,000 troops or something and literally take over the country, a bunch of bombs and missiles is not going to cause regime collapse. It's going to cause pain. But then, as you pointed out, there's also missiles that are going to be coming back this direction. And then there's the issue of Russia, who relies on a military issue with Iran for its drones, and then China, who has relations with both BRICS and the oil from Iran. Will they both just sit by passively and let this Israeli U.S. force destroy Iran?
Well, remember, for the Russians in particular, and I think to some extent the Chinese, they view what is likely to happen to Iran as something that inevitably will visit them. In other words, they see us as this rogue regime that's determined to retain and expand our military hegemony across the world. So if they stand by and watch Iran pulverized out of existence, then they'll think to themselves, we're next. And remember, they don't want a regime in Tehran that is going to open the floodgates to enemies that can come up through the Caucasus and enter Russia from the soft underbelly, which is Central Asia. I mean, one of the reasons the Russians are very happy to have a good relationship with the Chinese is that they don't want to be invaded again by people in Central Asia. Now, we laugh at such a thing, but it's a very serious problem in Russia. One of the reasons that Putin has bent over backwards to cultivate good relations inside Russia with its Muslim population. They very, very large numbers of Muslims, over 20 million of them. Most of them are of Turkic origin. Why do they want good relations with them? Because they know that if they should become hostile to Russia, that could open the gates to invasion from the south. And that invasion comes up through Iran, down through the Caucasus, and into Russia. Remember, during World War II, the Soviets moved most of their industry that they could into Siberia, beyond the range of German aircraft and bombers. Well, that was only possible because Central Asia was secure. It was only possible because Iran was secure. Why was Iran secure? Because we and the British negotiated an agreement so that we could ship supplies to Russia through Iran. Iran is strategically vital to Russia. That's why Russia won't stand by and do nothing, which means if we unleash this mother of all strike strategies, which I guess is what the president is saying, we're going to be at war with a lot more than Iran. And it may not be straightforward at first. It may not be overwhelming at first, but it will grow and it will become a very, very serious and dangerous challenge to us. And we may lose everything in the Middle East as a result. That's something that people in Washington don't do. They never ask the question, we have to measure what we might gain by what we might lose. If you ask that question, you do not go to war with Russia and Eastern Europe. You do not go to war with Iran today. There's too much at stake for us, but we're not thinking in those terms. And we have no strategy. There is no strategic thinking in Washington at all. What I just outlined to you, I'm trying to give you an appreciation for what the Russians think, because they do think strategically. They act accordingly. There is a rational strategic calculus involved. That's why they went into Ukraine. We don't seem to have any. What we have are impulses. Yeah. One impulse today, a different impulse tomorrow, and everybody is hanging on every word from Donald Trump because he's seen as the man who verbally makes policy.
Well, I hope that at least somebody starts asking those questions before any bombs are dropped, because there is so much to lose and almost nothing to gain. in making this course of action. So I hope that's the direction that we end up going. But we'll keep an eye on this and keep tracking it for our viewers here. Before I let you go, finally, is there anything new going on with Our Country, Our Choice that we should know about?
Yeah, we're finally getting to the point where these programs are going to begin in May, I think, on a weekly basis. The pilot seems to have done very well. Eventually, you'll see that on the internet. But for the moment, it's in the hands of sponsors and investors. And a lot of people are coming forward that very much want to support it. It's had a good reception. And I mean, one of the most frequent comments is the nation needs this show. Absolutely must happen. Tucker has said that. Many others have said it. So I think it'll probably happen. But I got to tell you, it's been an education for me. I'm not in this business, as you know. And I have learned a lot from very smart people that have been in the business for a long time. And I have much greater respect now for the people that produce and develop all these programs that we value on television and on the internet. It's quite an achievement. I appreciate it now in ways I never did before.
Wow. Well, we're really eager to start watching. So let us know when that happens, and we'll certainly direct folks there. And is there some place that they can go to find it, or how will they know when it's?
Well, I think you'll find it being broadcast or streamed over a number of different networks when the time comes. Right now, it's just being called Macgregor, and somebody suggested over the weekend. I was in Naples. Said, "Why don't you call it Macgregor Unhinged?" A couple of people that knew me said, "Oh my God, he's already there. You don't need to tell everybody." So,
isn't that redundant? Exactly.
That's right. Well, I don't know what the hell they'll end up calling it eventually, but we're going to start with that and see where it goes.
Very good. Well, we're eager to watch it, and I agree with the comment from Tucker. It is something that everybody needs. We definitely need some alternatives to the mainstream media. So look forward to seeing that, and appreciate you coming back on today, Doug.
Okay. Thank you, Dan.
And we appreciate you guys too. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done it on your way out. And also to remember that we are on podcast. And I know some people don't have time to watch a video, but you love to listen to it on podcast. Go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, and you will find us there waiting for you. You don't want to miss another episode here, folks. We got a lot of stuff we're covering here. And we're actually going to cover later this afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit more about this issue with Iran and whether or not war is imminent, as Doug is concerned about. I'll show you some of the things you may not know this afternoon at 3 p.m. Thanks very much. We'll see you then on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.